welcome to the Lisa at the Edge podcast. So happy that you could join me today.
Hey, Lisa, thanks for having me.
So we've got you on the podcast today to talk about a few different topics. So you are Director for Cloud Transformation Services at Avanade. Is that correct? Always
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
to just double check those crucial facts. And you've been in the IT industry for about 20 years and
Yep.
have made the transition from virtualization to cloud native and Azure. So I'd like to really learn about that journey, about how you adapted to change. I know that's something that's sort of interesting to everyone. And then I thought we could spend a little bit of time on containers and AKS, and you can give us a sort of 101 pitch on containers, because I still feel that is a topic that people, it's the new buzzword, right? It's the new buzzword, and
Right.
I'd like to understand exactly what they are, what they mean, and what the use case is. And then finally, if we could touch on diversity in tech, I think both of us have some opinions on that topic,
Yep.
and it'd be fun to share those, right?
Yeah, definitely. That all sounds good. So,
Okay, awesome.
I started in tech a long time ago. I've been in tech for about 20 years, and I actually started as a PC tech. And I remember um, I first started working with like Windows 3.1.
Wow.
Yeah, was happy to move away from that quickly, and then started to focus on Windows 95 and then 98 and then et cetera, et cetera. So it's been an interesting journey. I started there and then just kind of worked more towards like network administration because that was super interesting to me, and landed there. And then I was a generalist, and I've always baked in like Linux and open source throughout my career, even from the beginning. Like I'm Linux Plus certified, and I got that early on, right, when I was going to school. But most of my jobs have been, Windows and Microsoft focused. So it's interesting to see things kind of come full circle. And even in the Microsoft space, we do a ton of stuff with Linux now.
Yeah.
Very, very, very interesting. But yeah, I was generalist for a long time, mostly focused on Microsoft technologies with some open source baked in here and there. And then I was internal, and I decided to make the jump to consulting to try it out.
Oh, really?
And I wasn't sure. I was like, I don't know if I'll like consulting. Not
Did you
sure
like Did you like consulting?
I'm still in it.
Yep.
So consulting has its pros and its cons. Um, but it's going from boutique consulting companies, like smaller shops,
Yep.
all in the Microsoft space, to a large consulting company like Avanade / Accenture is a big difference. And I'm finding that I really like working for one of the major consulting companies out there in the space.
Nice.
So it's a
How
lot
long have you
different.
been at Avanade now?
Coming up on 3 years here.
Okay.
So
And
I'm in my third year.
what is it specifically that you do like about being part of that larger consulting org?
It's just the projects are a lot bigger,
Right.
right? And we're doing a lot of things on the cutting edge. But like when I was at boutique shops, sometimes you'd go in on a consulting engagement and it's just you,
Right.
or it might be you and another person. Whereas usually on the projects I'm on now, it's a team, and like it's always a team.
Yeah.
And our teams might be folks from the US, folks that are, in India or the Philippines, folks that might be in Europe. It's just really cool being able to work with all types of different people. And the other thing that's really cool too, and not to jump ahead on the diversity topic, but there's actually a lot of women that work at Avanade and Accenture, and a lot of women that work like in all types of different areas. So like
Right.
infrastructure and
Yeah.
like,
So not
so
just
it's
like the typical roles that you find females in tend to be marketing, project management, etc.
right.
Not that there's anything wrong with them. Like my best friend is in marketing. I've done sort of bid and project management. And I think we spoke about this briefly. That's where I see most of the females. I'm more, again, not to jump ahead, but I am more often than not the only female within the room, or the Zoom,
Yeah.
as it's just now. But yeah, so that's really cool. So you're saying that basically there's a really good representation of females across all of the different roles, technical and non-technical.
Yeah, it's good. It still needs improvement. Like there's still a long ways to go.
Yeah.
But I've never experienced this before where there's a lot of women working in, like I've never been at a company where there are a lot of women represented in the tech space. And I've always been on the infrastructure side, so it's been a lot of dudes.
Yeah, yeah.
Typically on the
That is a dude heavy area. Although it's definitely one that's also improving. Sarah Lean, that was on the first round of podcasts, works at Microsoft, cloud advocate, focused on sort of infrastructure and ops. And then I actually have another female coming on next week, April Edwards, who's sort of made that ops to DevOps transition as well, which is pretty cool. So
nice.
yeah, so it's definitely something that's proven. But you're right, a lot of dudes in infrastructure. And I think
Oh,
on you
sorry,
go.
go ahead.
No, it's okay, on you go.
So just kind of going back to my journey. So I moved from a generalist into consulting, and then I was doing some SharePoint work, and I don't always tell people that I know SharePoint.
Don't do that.
I don't want to get pulled into like SharePoint projects. Not that there's anything wrong with SharePoint, but it's not what I want to do, right?
Yeah.
So I started with some SharePoint projects, and then I quickly moved over to all System Center.
Right. Okay.
And then I got awarded in the MVP program in System Center, and I focused on that for a long time. And System Center was awesome because we were doing like data center, virtualization,
Mm-hmm.
private cloud. There's just a lot of cool stuff there.
Yeah.
Um, and I started to move from just like System Center and data center management to more of a DevOps focus and more of a cloud focus. And when I say cloud, like I jumped in cloud early on, like in 2008 timeframe, right? With AWS, I was running stuff on EC2 instances
Right.
and
Yeah.
some other stuff with other cloud vendors. And I took a
Mm-hmm.
look at Azure, right, when it was classic, and it's like, this is
Yeah.
not ready. So I kept going with the on-prem stuff, but when Microsoft moved over to ARM and they really started to ramp up on Azure, that's when I jumped back in like head first with that, and with DevOps, and the container stuff just followed on from there too. So it's
Yeah.
been a exciting ride, and I'm excited for the future and what that brings as well.
And how did you feel about making that leap from on-prem stuff, and then looking at AWS? Like, what was the situation that you were in to first of all, allow you to do that? Did you have to make like any kind of decisions? And like, was there anything that sort of held you back? Or because I think a lot of people, even today, and I was speaking to April actually on our prep call for our podcast. We were speaking about how, at least here in the UK and maybe across Europe, we are still maybe a year or two behind in terms of cloud adoption than the
Mhm.
US. And that a lot of customers, are kind of panicking, like, oh, we're not there yet and we're so far behind. And they still have to do a lot of this infrastructure modernization, potentially moving to infrastructure as code. A lot of the services that they're looking on, in Azure, tend to be IaaS heavy. And I think as well, the people who work in those companies and people who work in those space, it's still something that a lot of people are having to grasp, is how do they make that move. And I think fear holds a lot of people back as well. So I just wondered if you could just share some like thoughts around that, and any kind of experiences that you had that really helped you make that move.
That is a great question. Like, I love how you position that question, because I think a lot of people struggle with that, and a lot of companies struggle with that too. And it was something that I struggled with too. Like, I wanted to go towards DevOps, and I wanted to go towards cloud like early on. And, you don't always work for a company that supports that because maybe
Yeah.
they're not moving there.
Yeah.
But if you see the industry moving there and you want to move that direction for your career, sometimes you have to just like take some extra time, take some of your time, start to learn about the technologies, maybe start doing labs, right? Even on your own time, even go as far as like set some money aside and pay for some certifications in that space.
Yeah.
And then eventually you keep doing that and you will move towards that. The other things that you can do too, if you're at a company and maybe they're not moving quick enough to cloud and DevOps, one way to prepare yourself is start to do things on premises in a cloud and DevOps way. So
Yeah.
we can take things like PowerShell, right? Start to do as much scripting with like PowerShell, or if you can use Python, use that. Start to do those things today.
Mm-hmm.
Start to focus on configuration management of your servers.
Yeah.
And if you have like Hyper-V or VMware, you can start to templatize the virtual machines and the way you deploy those as well. And so you're starting to do things in a DevOps and a cloud way. You could even take it a step further, and those PowerShell scripts or those Python scripts you're working on, throw them up in a GitHub repo, right? And you can start to do things through pipelines. You don't have to
Yeah.
be in cloud to start to do things in a cloud way and start to ramp yourself up. So that's one way that an individual can start to work towards that.
Yep.
I think in regards to like the other parts of your question, a lot of companies are still they're moving kind of slow towards cloud. They're not sure. Um, the whole cloud and DevOps thing is coming in waves,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the best thing I can say is just be prepared for those waves from a skill standpoint, and just continue to look at reports, right? I know that RightScale has a yearly report, has a lot of good data in there. There's Gartner reports. Bring that stuff to your leadership.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Try to find like projects where you can automate to decrease cost or make things more efficient, and then talk about how you could do those things in the cloud, to do some of that as well.
Yeah, and I think you make a really good point there, right? So everything that you've just said, I have a few doors open in my mind and ways to go. So one of the things, so when I first saw infrastructure as a code was at an Azure user group, I think. It was definitely some kind of Microsoft user group. It was quite some time ago. And it was infrastructure as a code being done on premises. And it blew my
Okay.
mind because I was like, this is beautiful.
Yeah.
It was actually Martin Coupland, who I had on the podcast previously. He had basically set it up so he'd link to their CRM. So when a sales guy placed an order, they could like automatically templatize the VMs and basically use infrastructure as a code to deploy them. And I was just like, I was at an
Nice.
MSP and I was like, this is amazing, right? So I think that's a very good point that people forget. DevOps, infrastructure as a code, things like that, you do not need to be in the cloud. And they are far more of a process, a people and a team kind of thing
Right.
than
Right.
a tech thing, right? Which is another whole big area. And then I like your point there about taking the time yourself to go and focus on certifications, learn new technologies. But I really like that point on there's reports out there. There's so much information you can keep up to date in terms of the trends, etc. And something that you talk about, which I really love, is transforming the position of IT into a strategic partner to the business. And I
Yes.
love that. And I think that for companies to really successfully adopt cloud, for them to get the most out of cloud, the IT department needs to go from being the IT department who you give a budget to every year and you just expect them to do some stuff, right? To
Yep.
becoming that strategic partner who helps the business achieve their goals. And I think that you can't wait for the business to come to you and be like, hey guys, can you now be our strategic partners? Because that's probably not going to happen. You need to, I think as well, position yourself as that strategic partner and start trying to get into those conversations.
Yeah, 100%. And that's the world we live in today, right? Um, if you don't start to position yourself that way, you will have leaders within the business. They have credit cards,
Mm-hmm.
they own budgets,
Mm-hmm.
they can go out to, SaaS providers, they can go out to Azure, they can go to AWS, GCP, whatever, and they can start consuming.
Yep.
And so, IT folks, we need to be there front and center and like supporting those folks and just bringing cloud capabilities to them,
Yeah.
right? We want to get in front of shadow IT and we
Yeah.
want to become a strategic partner to the business.
Yeah.
And we want to it's important to understand the solutions that are out there in cloud because they help you drive faster, right?
Yeah.
Understand what Microsoft offers from an IoT perspective. Understand what they offer from, public Azure to Azure Stack Hub.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if your company has maybe regulations or something where they can't take, certain solutions to public cloud, well, maybe Azure Stack Hub is the answer. Maybe Azure Stack Edge is the answer,
Yeah.
right? But there's ways to do cloud, and you want to start to understand those things. And containers another one as well, right? Start to understand that and figure out how could this help the business, right? Is my marketing department planning to spin up some new campaign and they're going to run X amount of websites, right?
Mm.
But they may need to burst on a moment's notice. Well, let's put all that stuff on containers. Um, let's run it on AKS, or maybe we just run it on PaaS and Azure. And then when we need to scale, it just scales,
Yeah.
right? For this marketing campaign. And you bring that to the business so you can help them move faster,
Yeah.
right?
And I think there's two things there. So I think the traditional maybe reasons for not going to cloud, like regulations, need to be on-prem, latency, etc., they are slowly but surely disappearing, right? They are fast disappearing. And if you are still using them as an excuse not to modernize or use cloud, you're potentially setting yourself up for a fall, I think. Like you say,
Right, right.
Azure Stack Hub, running Azure services on-prem within your data center or where you need it. So pretty much all those are gone. We have a customer who, and this is interesting, right? So they process financial data and they have a need to be PCI compliant. Now Azure
Okay.
has a PCI badge, right? It's got loads of certifications. But
Yep.
if your auditor still reads the certification or the whether it's legislation, etc., and they interpret that as you having to have that on-prem, then just because Azure has that badge, right, doesn't mean that you can then use that. But what they've done is they've got Hub. So until the auditing and certification and regulatory world catches up, because it's even further behind, right? And
Oh
it's
yeah.
still asking you to do crazy stuff. Until it catches up, instead of waiting for them, they've got Azure Stack Hub and they're beginning to modernize their applications. And to be honest, they will probably always have to have something on-prem because of the need to be next to the data.
Oh
And the
yeah.
fact that like ingress, egress just would not make sense, right? But so two things. One, I think you can't be using those excuses anymore. And in fact, you should be the person who's there with the answers as to why, how you can work around that or why they're no longer relevant. And the other thing
Exactly.
there is very much going to different parts of the business and understanding what they need from a technology perspective. Like, go to marketing. What is it that you need? What are you needing? What are you lacking? What's your plans? What are you going to, what are you trying to achieve with your marketing plan this year? Is there a way that we can help?
Right.
And that, I think that that's just so unusual for people to think about, but that is how you become that strategic partner.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. All good points there. And the more you do that, the more you make yourself valuable to the business.
Yes.
So as technology changes, you stay up to date with technology, but you also have a lot of value to the business
Mm-hmm.
and become that liaison, become that advisor, and become the person that they go to when they have an initiative and they'll come to you for the answers and
Yeah,
for help.
absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So we've mentioned containers and AKS a few times. I've attended a few talks on containers, and when I'm there and I'm listening to the pitch, I get it. I've always struggled in my head, like, what's the difference between a virtual machine and what's the difference between a container? And I think it was at Microsoft Ignite in London, there was a talk and someone put up a visual representation, which obviously we can't do here, but put up of the difference, and it made sense, right? But it's something that I struggle to fully understand and then convey to other people in terms of what are containers, what's the use case, what's the benefit, and then why this is important to me is I really want to understand AKS as well, because that's important to Azure and Azure Stack Hub. So I wondered if you could just give us a quick lesson there.
Yeah, definitely. So the first thing I want to start with is like containers and Kubernetes are hot buzzwords right now,
Mm-hmm.
right? In the industry, we all know that
Yep.
they are not the answer for every problem.
Yes.
So there's a lot of people out there that treat them as like, oh, we have this need,
Mm-hmm.
containers, Kubernetes. Oh, we have this problem, containers, Kubernetes. No, there's
Stop.
there's yeah, there's still a place for virtual machines. Like a lot of Azure projects, we still have IaaS,
Mm-hmm.
and also we have PaaS, so platform as a service, and then we have containers. And in fact, when we look at going to the cloud, um, there's a awesome decision tree out there on Microsoft documentation, and I've seen other slides from presenters and stuff with a similar decision tree. But when you first go to cloud, you actually want to look at PaaS first.
Mm.
And if you can't do PaaS, then kind of the next step is, well, can we containerize it? If we can't containerize the workload, okay, well, let's put it on a VM. But you're doing IaaS VMs, which are, they're virtual machines,
Yep.
but in cloud, you have a lot more flexibility where you can like patch them easier.
They're like virtual machines, but on steroids, right?
Yeah, exactly.
They're
On
like,
steroids. Like,
yeah. Like that's just how I imagine it. I'm just like, they're virtual machines, but they're not. Like you can just do so much more with them.
that's a perfect way to put it. So circling back to containers, um, they're basically like servers, right? But they're scaled back to just what you need.
Okay.
And so let's take, for example, maybe I have a web front end that I'm running on Apache Tomcat, and I only need a few things, right? I need the code for that's going to run on this web server, and then I need the code for the web server and maybe one other dependency.
Mm-hmm.
So with a container, what I'm doing is I'm bringing all of that stuff into the container.
Okay.
So as opposed to running a full blown like Linux server with all the other stuff you don't need, you just bring in, right, a very, very, very scaled back version of Linux, typically like Alpine Linux or something else. And then you bring in your Apache Tomcat, which is your web server. And then you bring in the code that's going to run on the web server and maybe one other dependency, right? And you
Mm-hmm.
package all of that up. So now you have this container, and you can start this up very fast. You can move it around to different like orchestration systems, or, run it even in PaaS, or
Yeah.
run it in Docker, or run it, there's a lot of options. As opposed to a virtual machine, if we were going to run the same workload, we need the full operating system, and we need all the stuff that comes with the operating system.
Right. Okay.
And we still got to boot up the virtual machine, right? It's heavier networking. It's like heavier on everything.
Okay.
Um, and so you're still working with a full-blown server, so things just take a lot longer. You still have to deploy the server. You need configuration management. You need all of that stuff, right? So if you look at the two, The containers are a lot lighter.
Okay.
Now, not every workload is a good fit for a container. So let's take like databases, for example. We typically don't containerize databases, right? We still run those on full-blown IaaS VMs,
Mm-hmm.
or we run those as a PaaS service. And
Yep.
the PaaS service was built specifically, right, to run that database workload. So it's optimized for performance and all of that stuff. Um, so hopefully that gives you kind of, we don't have a lot of time, but hopefully that
Yeah.
gives
No,
the
that really,
listeners some
yeah.
idea of like containers from a one-on-one perspective.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good description. I definitely have that in my head now, so I can kind of see the difference. I also really love that decision tree about, you should look to go to paths first, because of course, right, you should shoot for the stars, as it were. You should look to do, if you're going to get involved with a platform like Azure or AWS that has platform as a service type services, you should want to use the coolest tools in the box, right? But if you can, and that's okay because not everyone can, then thinking about containers, and then if you still can't, that's okay. Not everyone can, not everyone workloads, ready for that, or you might not have the time or the investment yet to do that modernization. You might be working in phases. Then do
Right.
IaaS. And even then, that's still cool, right? And it's still 10 times better than what you've been doing, sorry, on virtualization. So, so I really, really love that, the way of pitching that. So back to containers then. Okay, so we understand from a containers perspective, the other element to containers is orchestration, right? And
Yeah.
there are options when it comes to orchestration.
Yeah.
And it's something that you definitely, I get the impression that you need to manage them.
Well, so with containers, you have options of running them in different places, right? So I'll give you a scenario.
Okay.
I was on a project. We were migrating a lot of websites. These were all just like open source sites, various platforms, a lot of PHP, but different stuff involved as well. Um, when we embarked on that project, we said, okay, let's see if we can take these to PaaS.
Okay.
And so that was like the first kind of step. And we can run, open source PHP, Java sites in Microsoft Azure App Service. We can run them there. We started going through the migration, and some of the sites, as we were, kind of peeling back the onion, we
Mm-hmm.
started to discover these oddball dependencies, right? Like, like for example, one of the sites was running October CMS.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of that?
No, but I can tell by your face right now that is not a good thing.
I'd never heard of that before either, right? It was like the first time ever, but it's a thing. Um, and then like some of the other sites were running something called Composer, and Composer's like an automation tool for like PHP sites. So you
Okay.
can use it to like pull in packages that your site needs and stuff like that. So as we're going to migrate to Azure App Service, like Composer, it didn't work well in Azure App Service. So we were trying to take the code and like, okay, let's bring the code to Azure App Service. So the next best thing was like, well, all right, let's stop doing this. We're burning a lot of cycles. Let's
Mhm.
containerize it.
Yeah.
And that's
Okay.
what we
Yeah.
did. We containerized it, and we were able to bring in Composer because we have a full-blown web server still,
Mm-hmm.
Tomcat. We were able to containerize that and run that container on Azure App Service. So we were still running PaaS in that scenario, but we're running a
Um,
container because the dependencies of that workload didn't work well in pure PaaS.
yeah. Yeah.
So with like Azure, you can run containers on Azure App Service, and I
I
think a
did
lot of
not.
people actually overlook that.
I did not know that. That's
Y-
very cool.
Yeah, so maybe you don't need the overhead of Kubernetes.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you don't have the people to manage Kubernetes, right? But you still have a reason to run containers. So you could look at something like App Service. There's also ACS. So Azure Container Service, if you just need to
Yeah.
run like one container and you don't need a full-blown orchestration system like Kubernetes, you could run it on ACS. Now,
Um,
if you have a lot of containers or you're running a microservices based application, right, where you have more complexity, um, that's where you want to bring in something like Kubernetes,
right.
right? And then with Microsoft, you have Azure Kubernetes Service, which is I like to say it's a semi-managed Kubernetes service because they're managing the master nodes for you, but they're
Okay.
not managing the worker nodes for you. And the
Okay.
master nodes are like the servers that are running the actual Kubernetes. And the worker nodes are the servers that are running your containers, right? So Microsoft has removed a tremendous amount of overhead from your plate, which is amazing. That's the goal, right? We want to reduce the administrative overhead in IT so we can move towards that strategic partner to the business
Yep.
by focusing on the workloads and the applications that the business needs to run.
Yep.
More about that and less about like spending a ton of time on administration,
Yes.
right? So so if you have a lot of containers or you have complexities, then you want to look at something like Kubernetes.
Okay.
And with a full orchestration system, you have like scaling. You can, your containers will move around as needed automatically across nodes. And you'll have services that track those. So as far as like traffic, and you can bring in things like service mesh. I mean, it's a whole nother world, right?
Yeah, it sounds like
Um,
it.
and if you think there's a lot to Azure or any of the cloud platforms, drop in Kubernetes on top of that. Like there's a whole nother world that you have to learn.
Yeah.
It gets crazy pretty fast.
And I think that's probably one of the, going back to what we said earlier, it's probably one of the blockers to people trying to understand, because they look at it all and they think, well, it's so massive. How do you keep up to date with it all? What do you learn about? But I think, like you've said before, reading reports, finding out what's hot, what's the trend, and then, just knowing enough about each of them so that you can match those up to business needs if you hear them, right? Because also the other risk is if you don't stay up to date with this stuff, Microsoft or somebody's going to go in at C-level, be like, you should be in the cloud, it'll solve all your problems. And they'll be like,
Yep.
yes, sign the dotted line. And then they're
Yep.
going to come down to your department and they're going to say, why are we not in the cloud? And I've decided we're going to go to Azure. And if you are not there and ready with that, okay, let's figure out whether this is the best option or whether we can, etc. You've not tried to understand that world, then you're in for a world of pain.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
and you,
Definitely spot on.
you want to avoid that, right? So I think it is a huge world. Um, there's a lot to learn, but don't let that stop you. Just get started. You will quickly find what's relevant, what you find interesting. There's so many people out there to help as well. People share knowledge, just get started, I'd say.
I love that. Just get started. Start small. It's okay to, crawl, walk, and then run.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to, jump in and all of a sudden you're running. It's
Yeah.
okay to start small, right? Start with Docker, start with containers locally, kind of move from there, maybe start running those in, PaaS,
Mm-hmm.
and then start looking at like Kubernetes after you understand how containers work.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I think as well, don't be worried that when you do get started, you're not going to be an expert. And I think when it comes to things
Yes,
like Azure, Kubernetes, cloud native stuff, I think you need to become comfortable with that. Like you need to become comfortable with the fact that you're probably not going to be an expert. You can probably specialize in a few different areas, but you're not going to be the expert like you've maybe been used to being at that kind of level. Because one, things change so fast, it's probably impossible. Two, you need to be able to dip in and out of these different technologies and again be able to understand which one fits your situation and need, right? And then be able to match those up. And I think the difference is become an expert in learning, become an expert in problem
Yes.
solving or
Yes.
finding information. That's where you want to become an expert, not
That
not
is
necessarily specific technology.
that is spot on. And like
I'm on fire today, Steve.
you
On
are.
fire.
And don't worry about being the expert. Like you said before too, there's a huge community, and once you dive in, you'll be surprised how accepting and welcoming these different tech communities are,
Yes.
to folks as you start to embark on your journey. And yeah, you don't need to be an expert. Folks that have a lot of experience, like myself. When I have to start with something new, I'm not the expert. I'm learning. I'm
Mm-hmm.
learning something new all over again. We're all learning all the time, and there are people that are at different points in their journey,
Mm-hmm.
and that's okay. And I think I don't know if there's something called imposter syndrome too.
Yes.
I don't know if you've
Yeah.
experienced that or not, but
I
it's
I
a real
experienced
thing.
that heavily because I am not a techie, right? So when I wanted to start this podcast and I wanted to start blogging, I've wanted to do this for ages. Something that has held me back is that I am not a techie. So then I was like, what do I have to add to this world? Will people find out, even though I'm really honest about it? It's definitely like something I suffer from, not only in this podcast, but on a weekly basis sometimes. And I get like you have just seen / heard, I get quite excited when I'm like, no, I do know what I'm talking about. So yeah, definitely something I've experienced.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And like, how do you get over that, right? When you experience that imposter syndrome, like what do you do to get past that?
Well, I wasn't expecting the questions to be
Oh,
flipped round. So I think it goes back to what I said earlier about just getting started, right? So I think action is the cure to so many things, right? So
ah,
people,
that's good.
this comes from as well a bit of my, like, I did a little bit of stint in fitness. I competed in a bodybuilding competition, all that kind of stuff. But it comes from that as
Yes.
well, right? People think that you need motivation to get started. You don't. Action breeds motivation, and I also think that
Love that.
action is it's not easy, right? That's not an easy answer, but action is the cure to so many things. It's the cure to procrastination. It's the cure to fear of doing something, because if you're scared about, like I was, about doing this podcast, and if you're scared about how people are going to perceive you, that is such a useless drain of energy and time, and
Mm,
all you're doing is holding yourself back, and nobody else even knows about it, so you're just there in your own little world of turmoil. Right? So as soon as you take the action and you take a step and you do something, then you quickly realize that, one, it's not nearly as bad as you expected. Two, you probably know a lot more than you thought you did. And three, going back to this whole not everyone's an expert, you have to learn, right? So for me, it was getting started with these podcasts. If it's for, maybe if I need to, so I would say that in my role now, I work with Kenny really closely. Kenny's obviously an amazing speaker, brilliant with
awesome
customers.
guy.
Yeah, he can deliver the Azure Stack pitches um, brilliantly. And I think I've been out of presenting and stuff for some time. And if I'm being brutally honest, I have a massive hang up on whether I could do a good job. Not an as good job, we're two very different people, but I don't want to like let anyone down. So what I've
Mm,
started to do is make sure that I'm in on every single one of those calls, and you will I don't know if he finds this annoying or not, hopefully not, but I basically just start to engage, yeah, and I add in and I speak and I'll take some questions, and it's again just that action. So just like you've got to
that's
break
awesome.
through and just
Thanks for sharing that. I'm,
get it done.
mental note taken on that.
Yeah.
Especially the action breeds motivation. Is
Hmm.
that what I love
Yeah,
that. I
so
will
true.
remember that. That is
Um,
awesome. So
yeah.
so um so switching gears kind of to, from the imposter syndrome to like diversity in tech. Do
Yes.
you I'm just throwing this question out here because this is something that I wonder about. Do you think that like women and minorities, do you think they experience that more?
Hmm. I think that there is probably a significant chance that the answer to that question is yes. Because although I have been extremely lucky in my career in that I have not encountered a lot of the negative experiences that other females encounter in industries that are male dominated, right? One, I don't know if that's because no one would try it with me because I would, knock them out. But I think I've just been really fortunate. And a lot of people that have been mentors and champions for me in my career have been male. However, I think as I have progressed in my career, because I think back in the early days, I was maybe just a little bit more naive. I was younger. I was coming into the industry. I didn't really know that it was that I was going to be the only female in the room for years to come. So I think as I've progressed in my career and I've maybe moved up a little bit in terms of my roles and the job that I do, I definitely, if you're making me think about it now, I definitely think it's made worse by the fact that quite often I am extremely aware that I am the only female in that meeting. And if I am going to open my mouth, it's weird. I feel like it's not just me. It's I'm representing on a bigger front, which is, I mean, you've really made me think about that there, to be honest.
Got it. Got it.
What do
Yeah,
you think?
I'd say I think so. I think the answer is yes. I'd love to see a poll like on Twitter and just see people's responses to that. For me, I've built a brand over time, and so a lot of times, um, if I go to a meeting and stuff, like people know who I am, and I'll
Hmm.
just start speaking and about the topic that's at hand and stuff like that. So, um, I think I've gotten so used to that I'm able to kind of get past that. There's definitely been times where, if I go to a meeting or something and someone doesn't know me, their, their demeanor towards me, um, is very, I don't know how to say this, but they basically treat me like I'm not there or not, you know, like I'm irrelevant, right, to the meeting.
Hmm.
And then when I start presenting or they find out that I'm the person, the expert that they brought in, that was
Yep.
brought in, their demeanor changes.
Yeah.
And so it's just very weird. I've experienced that a few times.
Yep.
Um, so
So
yeah, that can be very weird.
yeah, you've actually, maybe I'm just super positive about my experiences, but actually that you've made me think there, and there are plenty of times where I have gone into, I think more, I don't know if I'm noticing this less because it's virtual meetings or maybe it's just not there, but in physical meetings, like I'll walk in there and you can tell that they full blown expect me to be maybe a project manager, maybe, I don't know, something else. And when I come, like when I start talking about tech or I challenge them or ask them a question or kind of start talking, you can see the shock in people's faces. Like you can physically see it, right? It's almost like when I tell people I have a law degree, and it's like, I don't know, it's like maybe because I'm blonde as well. Like, well, I'm not naturally blonde, as lockdown has shown us all. But I have experienced that, so I can totally understand what you mean. And I think that then, like you say, when you recognize you're in a situation like that, you almost um you feel like you have something to prove. I think I maybe get like a little bit like that and a little bit competitive, or just like I'm such a fan of the saying, like, don't underestimate me. Like, it won't be fun.
Yeah. That that's interesting. We share that same experience then.
Hmm.
And that's why I think it's important for, things like your podcast and, showing people in the world in the tech space that, you are technical. Like I view you as technical,
Mm,
right? But at the same time, I also know you,
yeah,
right? So I know that you're technical. Um, Working at a place like Avanade and Accenture has really, it's just been an amazing experience. Like some of the best and deepest software developers, Linux admins, like one of the deepest Linux admins that I know is a woman.
yeah.
And I'm always asking to get her on my projects and she's never available because she's that good. Like, and her skill set is like, it's beyond Linux, but like every time I have a need, I think of her because of how good she is. Like she's jumped into some of our projects and she's saved the day.
Mm,
Um, and we just need to, I don't know what needs to happen in tech, but we need to throw those stereotypes out the window.
yeah. Do you know
Oh,
what, as
you're
well? I think that it's like people vastly underlook the value of having a diverse workforce, right? Because
yes.
females do bring certain things to the table. Like, I can also tell in some meetings where maybe there's a sales guy in a suit, right? So there's a sales guy in the suit, there's technical guys. I'm just going to say it, they're white, they're male, they're probably the same age. And I can tell that sometimes customers are quite standoffish, right? Because they're like, I'm about to be sold to. So they're instantly defensive. Whereas when I start to talk to them and I am talking in a passionate way about their problem that they want to solve, or the tech, or I'm being really honest with them, I think
Mm,
that one, it's because maybe my demeanor and my is different and my passion is there. But two, I do think it's because I'm a female. And I think that they tend to trust me a little bit more. Or they just feel different about interacting with me. And I like, we're human beings, right? There's so much. I've been reading and listening to a lot on evolutionary psychology, and it's just wild how much things are still so inbuilt into us, and we are
yeah.
no longer in the environment that they were built for, right? So it has all kinds of crazy um, effects. But I do think that that's underlooked. Just having also, another major thing is age. Like, I would say if I've suffered anything in my career more, whether it's sexism or ageism, it would be ageism. People have looked at me and kind of been like, well, you've not done your time. You can't add value here.
Yeah.
When actually, I think things in companies like new bloods, different ages, males, females, Black people, other people of color, disabled people, like all that would provide you with just such a different perspective that it's hugely valuable to a business.
Yeah, definitely. You bring up ageism and I don't think that's talked about enough. It's a very real thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's ageism stereotypes and discrimination that happens on both ends of the spectrum, right?
Yes,
You have young
absolutely.
people and they're written off like, oh, they don't know what they're talking about. They don't
Mm-hmm.
know, they don't have enough experience. But a lot of times those folks will bring fresh new ideas.
Yeah.
And if they've just come out of like college, like fresh out of school, I like to say FOS. Um, if they're FOS, they might be bringing ideas or stuff that they've learned that are new in the world of academia.
Mm-hmm.
They might be bringing that right to your organization, to your projects and things like that. On the other end of the spectrum, I've also seen ageism issues where like someone is written off because they're older.
Yeah. Yeah.
And people are like, oh, they're a dinosaur. They don't know what they're talking about, but
Yeah.
they bring a lot of experience to the table. And I've
Yeah.
seen people get laid off. They can't get they can't get another job because there's
Yeah.
like discrimination and things like that that are happening. Um, so ageism is like a very real thing. And, it's something, someday I'll be in my 50s and that'll be something that I'll be worried about. I've
Yeah.
also experienced it on the other end too, both being Black, right, and being
Mhm.
young.
Yeah.
And I've been in director positions um, at a young age, and I've been an IT manager at a young age. And there are people out there that don't want to accept that.
Yes.
And I mean, you don't have to be a certain age to have a certain position or a certain title.
Yeah.
You don't have to be a certain gender. You don't have to be a certain race to have a certain position or title. Or
You have to just have the skills, right? You have to have the skills, you
right,
have the aptitude, you have to
like
have the ability to do the role, right? That's it.
if you show up, if you do the work, if you chase like excellence, you have progress, you show that you can get things done,
Mm-hmm.
you might be on the fast track to promotion or achieving whatever goals you want to achieve.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. And I
so
think,
we were having an interesting conversation before about like tech conferences
yes, we
and
will.
like, yeah, so I love like your opinion about like the women in tech stuff, and it gave
Mm,
me a different perspective,
yeah.
and I think we share a lot of commonalities there.
Yeah, I think so. So I think I've said this on a previous podcast, and I think it goes down well with some women and it does not go down well with others. Um, but it's my experience, and it's one that I do feel strongly about. So ever since I've been in tech, me and one of my best friends, actually, she was in marketing and we worked at the same place together. She used to get asked to talk a lot on being a woman and working in the tech industry, right? And she used to turn stuff down, and I did as well, because we we did not relate to the people who were reaching out to speak to us, right? We didn't really feel comfortable with the whole premise of the like conversation. And I think of the few women in tech events I have been at, and I will make that point because it could be that my opinions and my experiences at the few have held me back from more which are different. However, my experience at every women in tech event I've been to, I have felt like an outsider. I have
Mm,
not felt like I'm part of the club. I have felt that because I am not either a software engineer or have given birth to a child and had to be on maternity leave and then come back, that somehow I'm not a woman in tech. Now, that might sound harsh, but
interesting.
also at every single one of these events, I have found another one, two, maybe say two or three other females. And it's so weird, right? We all end up like huddling together and we're sitting listening to talks and we're looking at each other and we're giving each other these like just uncomfortable like signs. And then we'll speak out, we'll cuddle together after the talk and we'll be like, what the fuck? Sorry, I don't know if I need to change this to be explicit if I swear. But and that's just been very much my experience. I think at these events, whilst it's really good to share, a lot of my friends are mums, it's definitely good to share those experiences. I don't think they should feature on the main stage. I want to go there and I want to hear one of my favorite tracks in one of the events was actually just hearing from female entrepreneurs who had startups, and they just came in and they just
Mm.
told their story, and I found that so valuable. Everywhere else, I didn't find a lot of value, and I felt like ostracized and just a little, they say that they're meant to increase inclusivity, and I feel like they do the opposite and they make it exclusive. And also there was loads of comments about like, why aren't more men here? And like, oh look, there's a man in the audience, like, so great for joining. I'm like, I did not turn up here expecting there to be men here.
Uh,
um like, whilst I think that is a really good thing, I think you have to be really honest, right? It's hard to get your employer to justify to your employer that you need to go to events and stuff as it is. It's going to be extremely hard. I'm not saying this is an excuse, but it's going to be extremely hard for a male probably to justify going to a women in tech event. And I I think I said this when we were chatting. I think we need to stop focusing on diversity in tech and just be more diverse in tech, right? So
Yeah, I think that's good. It's interesting. I love your perspective. And to be honest, I've never heard that perspective before, like our previous conversation. Um, in regards to like being Black in tech and conferences that are all about bringing diversity to tech, you know, the same sort of thing kind of happens there too. So like you'll be asked to speak about being Black in tech, where, you know, yeah, we need some sessions like that.
mhm,
Don't ask every Black person to focus on that. Like,
mhm.
ask them to come speak at your conference because they know HashiCorp Terraform, or they
Yeah.
know, Azure AKS, or they know, some
What's
other
going to be
technology.
what's going to be more valuable, right? Is having you come up on stage and talk and show that you're an expert, or have you go up on stage and talk about being Black in tech, which, let's face it, not as many people will attend. I think it's useful. I think it's useful for both Black people to hear they're not alone. I think it's useful for white people to hear, to learn. But the one that would make the most impact and start to change people's minds, perceptions, etc., is having you up on stage, being the expert that you are, whilst everyone can see that you are Black. Do you know what I mean? It's like,
And yeah, and shout out to Greg Greenlee. He actually started and runs Blacks in Technology. It's a organization across the US.
okay,
Um, it's kind of like user groups.
okay,
And he also runs a conference. It's called BitCon. And hats off to Greg. One of the things that he does, and one of the goals of the organization and the conferences, is to bring experts that are Black, to like the meetings and stuff and the conference, to talk about tech, talk about what they're doing, bring their skills to the forefront. There's
yeah,
definitely sessions about diversity and focused on like being Black in tech and stuff like that too. But you can actually go to BitCon and you'll find deep sessions on like Kubernetes, on like VMware, on Terraform, on console, on Azure. Like I did a session on Azure DevOps and integration with Microsoft Teams.
hmm.
Had nothing to do with diversity in tech.
So it's a tech conference.
Super technical. Yeah, it was a tech
It's a
conference.
tech conference, and it's primarily focused on tech. It just so
Yeah,
happens that, yeah.
primarily focused on tech, getting like Black people together. And it's not just a conference like just for Black people, like anybody can go to the conference.
Hmm.
So, I've had some people ask me, can only Black people go? Oh, it's open to everybody. The goal is to just show that there are Black people that are working in tech. They're in positions, they're doing well. Um, and they're talented, like, and to bring people together. It feels so good to go to a conference like that, to
Hmm. I can
see
imagine.
people around you that look like you, that are also nerds, that are geeks.
Yeah,
Right? It's
yeah.
just, it's a great feeling. And that's not to take away from any of the other conferences out there either, like Experts Live. Shout out to Experts Live.
Hmm.
uh Especially Experts Live Europe. Great conference. Actually, they've been doing some things too to help with diversity. There's so many great conferences out there, but if you want to make your conference more diverse, like, bring in those people that you want to bring that diversity,
Hmm.
and don't just always ask them to speak about like diversity.
Yeah.
Bring them because of their skill set, right?
Yeah.
and
So
and
true.
your conference will become more diverse organically,
Yes.
and that is more sincere and more genuine.
Yes. Yeah. Like we say, stop talking about diversity in tech Just
and
be
just
more
do it.
diverse.
Yeah.
That's like the best thing you can do, is just be more diverse.
Yeah, just do it.
Yeah, and that's really cool to hear about that conference. I feel like, and there's probably one out there. If anybody's listening, please let me know, because if there was a women in tech event like that, I would be all over it, right? But I feel like what I've experienced so far is just not that. And I'm, again, back to that, what's more valuable? I think having a network of females that you can speak to and share your experience with, super valuable. But I think what is more valuable is having women speakers just doing their thing. I have, Dell has a women in action group, I think it's called. So I've just recently discovered that there's all these different kind of groups. There's a Dell Black Alliance, I think, as well. Apologies if I've got that title wrong. I've literally just found this out. And yeah, there's a women in action group, and they've actually got a series of webinars on throughout this week and next week, just in terms of career development and all that kind of stuff, which I'm going to join, because I am
Nice.
going to try and make it more of an effort to find out about what Dell's Women in Action is like, who's there, what I can learn from, because I am aware of the fact that my experiences have put me off, and I don't want to do that, and I am passionate about diversity in tech and women in tech. And from what I have found so far on our intranet and stuff, it does look hugely valuable. And there's a lot
Nice.
of like real actionable topics there, which look awesome. So I'm looking forward to finding out more about that.
And that's something that more and more companies can do too, is have groups like that. Like
Mm-hmm.
at the company I work for, we have, they're called employee resource groups, so ERGs. And we have a ton of ERGs for all sorts of different things. And it's just awesome that you can join those groups and be around people that either look like you or have, something in common, where maybe you didn't work with them on a project, but this is another good way to get to know your colleagues.
Yeah.
So, hey, you touched on something briefly, and I just want to bring it up because I've experienced it. And it's, sometimes you go to conferences, and if you're not a software developer,
Yeah.
people kind of write you off or ignore you, like, oh, you're not a real techie
You're
because
not
you're
nerdy enough.
not a developer. And it's like, there's so many different roles and facets and paths in tech.
Yes.
It's not just all about like software development. Like, I've always been an infrastructure person, and I still am at heart, even though I'm doing DevOps, and I'm doing a lot more coding and stuff like that now,
Mm-hmm.
or have been in recent years. And I've honestly had to do that throughout my career, just through scripting and things like that. But, I think there's value in people talking and sharing ideas and sharing experiences and just sharing, what they know about tech. Even if you come from the infrastructure side, even if you come from that software development side,
Yes.
maybe you're a database admin and you're bringing some value to the conversation, right? Talking with infrastructure people or developers or what have you.
Yep.
Um, but
I
yeah, so
I absolutely agree. I think, and again, I think that those kind of silos and those kind of like um predefined conceptions of people in different roles, I think just hinder everyone.
yeah,
You're just hindering yourself, your organization that you're part of, the community that you're part of. You're just hindering people progressing, people being innovative, people moving forward with technology.
definitely,
So yeah,
definitely.
I absolutely agree with that. I'm a big advocate of, like we said at the very beginning of this podcast, IT and business coming closer together, to work closer together. So IT becoming that strategic partner. And I think then within IT, it's so important that all the different functions come together to help become that IT strategic partner. That's how you do that, right? You all work
Definitely,
together.
definitely. Well,
Well,
this was
that's been,
awesome. I love this conversation. So
me too. I'm not going to lie, right? I think that this is my favorite podcast so far. I'm just going to put that out there, and I'm not going to edit it either. Um, so thank you so much for coming on. I have loved this podcast, and I actually think that we should definitely do another one in the future. And I think that we've got some good perspectives and thoughts on how to be diverse in tech more than just speaking about it. And I think that maybe we could do something there. So
Yeah,
yeah.
for sure. Hey, thanks for having me on, Lisa. Really appreciate it. So, really enjoyed the conversation too.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much for joining. I'll speak to you again soon.
All
Bye
right.
bye.
Bye.